Kentucky Ancestors Town Hall was filmed at the headquarters of the Kentucky Historical Society. Join us as we reveal Kentucky family mysteries, share tips from our experts, and learn about Kentucky history, telling Kentucky's story, one family at a time.
Welcome, one and all, to the Kentucky Ancestors Town Hall. I'm Renee Shaw, delighted to be here today. We are going to take a look in the next half hour at a fascinating Kentucky story that's about money, slander, a family feud, and the Civil War. And here to help us with this all is Tamara Biggs. Welcome, Tamara. And you're no stranger to the Kentucky Historical Society because you volunteer here.
Yes.
So what do you do here when you volunteer?
Well, for the last 5 years, I've been course marshal behind Buffalo Trace during the half marathon. So when they're cooking MASH, that's a lovely place to be. I volunteered for this the last 2 years and worked the table out front. And then over the few years, I have helped catalog books upstairs. Questions would come in about things that have happened in the past, and I've looked at newspaper articles on microfilm and helped answer questions and get information out to people who were looking for information about their ancestors.
Right, so it's a point to our audience members. You could be sitting there this time, and the next year you could be sitting right here. Something to look forward to. Well, thank you, Tamara. So tell us about where you're from and your family's Kentucky connections.
Okay, I was born in Henderson County. My father was born in Henderson County, but my mother's family is from Livingston and Marshall County. But this branch of the family was from Ohio County, and this is my great-great-great-grandfather, Granville Crawford, which is as far back as I've been able to go on my mother's side of the paternal line. His children lived in Ohio County until my great-grandfather moved to Livingston County, and my mother was born in Smithland, was raised there. Met my father on a blind date with my father's twin brother, and her sister was on a blind date with my dad. They didn't like their respective dates. They traded. My aunt told my uncle never to come back. He married my Aunt Lola. That's a whole other story. And my parents have been married since 1953.
Yes, and they're still alive and doing quite well, so we're glad. And a colorful history has already unfolded, and there's more to this story. So it turns out that Granville Crawford played a role in a fascinating legal drama, and you're a lawyer, so you're all about this kind of stuff. And our researchers were unable to uncover some information that's probably new to you. Are you ready to learn more about your great-great-great-grandfather and the times he lived in? So one key fact that's come down to you all over these years is that in 1877, Granville Crawford, your great-great-great-grandfather, walked 11 miles from his home in Sulphur Springs in Ohio County to the county seat, Hartford. Now, as you know, he made the trip to testify in a court case. Now let's share with our audience the background for this story. Ohio County is the coal country region of western Kentucky. In 1798, when it was first laid out, it stretched all the way to the Ohio River, which gave it its name. It saw some action in the Civil War when Confederate cavalry burned the courthouse, which was being used as barracks for Union soldiers. By 1877, the county was home to about 20,000 people and, quote, a few soreheads. And so you'll see, welcome to Hartford, Kentucky, home of some happy people and a few soreheads. So Granville Crawford lived near Sulphur Springs. Today, there are just a few houses there scattered along Kentucky Highway 69, as you probably know. But in Granville's day, it was a bustling community with its own post office and a bona fide tourist attraction that was a sulfur well.
Ooh.
There were several of these in Kentucky, wells or springs where the water was rich in minerals like sulfur, magnesium, and iron. And in the 19th century, people believed water like that had these healing properties, and they drank and bathed in it to cure all kinds of ailments. So two prominent families lived in the Sulphur Springs community, the Beans and the Cannons. Lennon and Sarah Boswell Bean came to Ohio County from Maryland around 1811. Leonard was an influential leader in the Methodist Church and made a fortune in livestock, land, and finance. Now, sometime before 1870, his daughter, Polly, married your ancestor, Granville Crawford. Now, the 1870 census tells us that Granville, born in 1805, was living with his wife on a farm and that their assets were valued at about $2,000. With them at home were 4 children: Samuel C., age 33, Gabriel, age 15, Zelme, age 13, and interestingly enough, another Samuel C., age 14. Now, records indicate that Granville and Polly had not fewer than 14 children in all, but that only 7 really lived to adulthood. Now, you remember we mentioned the Cannon family. They had an in-law connection to Granville. Polly, Granville's wife, had a niece named Mary Bean. She married Jeremiah, or who they called J.B. Cannon. The Cannon family owned a hotel and at least one business in Sulphur Springs and had come there from Mercer County in the early 1800s. So far, so good. There's a lot of names, a lot of characters, and we're going to introduce yet another character to this story. So newspaper accounts say that a Dr. J.F. Bugg came to town around 1876 to practice medicine, bringing with him his daughter Mary. The 2 Marys, Mary Bugg and Mary Cannon, the former Mary Bean, hang with me, would eventually find themselves in a messy legal case. For some reason, Mary Bugg came to spend the night with Mary Cannon. Now, something happened, we're not sure what, and Mary Cannon accused Mary Bugg of stealing 2 yards of red calico fabric. Now, 2 yards of calico would have been worth about 15 cents in 1876, but it would cost $10 or $11 today. So whatever the amount, having his underage daughter accused of theft was enough to enrage Dr. Bugg, who filed a lawsuit for slander on her behalf, seeking damages of, guess how much? $5,000. The equivalent of $120,000 in today's money. So the lawsuit went to trial in Hartford, and Granville Crawford went there to testify on behalf of his niece, Mary Cannon. And even though Granville was 73 at the time, he decided to make the journey on foot, 11 miles each way. So Tamara, I have to ask, are all your family so fond of walking? Explain your long jeans and your good jeans. Well, you know, even in rural Kentucky in 1877, when people thought nothing about walking long distances, Granville's hike to Hartford got a lot of people's attention. It was apparently news in Sulphur Springs. Newspaper accounts and court records are both important sources for our research teams. And Tamara, have you had the chance to do research on other members of your family?
A few.
A few. And I hope they're all as colorful as what we're unfolding right now, right?
Unfortunately, no.
Unfortunately, no. Before we take a closer look at this story, let's hear from one of our team about how they uncover information and what kinds of resources family members can find as they explore their own forebears.
When hunting for your Kentucky ancestors, one of the more challenging record sets to use is court records. While some of these records have been microfilmed for easier access in libraries and archives, many important portions still reside in paper form at the State Archives in Frankfort or on site at the original courthouse of creation, which means you may need to plan a field trip to obtain access. The first thing to remember about court records is that there were several different types of records created and filed with the local court, depending on the time frame you were researching. For example, you may encounter early divorce records, naturalization documentation, coroner's inquests, deeds, circuit court order books, civil case files, court dockets, and even criminal case files. Each county may have arranged their files a bit differently, so be on the lookout for loose books that may stand alone or have missed the microfilming process. When you know what type of information you are looking for and can define it based on legal terms, you can look for the corresponding record set. Again, potentially located on microfilm or in original paper packets. In Kentucky, most courthouses are located in the county's largest city, often referred to as the county seat. But be careful, in a few of the counties with large urban populations, 2 courthouses can exist. Since we are focused on finding family information, which court records are my favorite? Any court case file with testimony. which can be found in many different scenarios: civil cases, chancery, divorce, pension affidavits, and criminal cases. Testimonies and/or affidavits lift the ancestors' voices from the obscurity of time. With page after page of transcribed statements and accounts, you can learn complex details about daily life, family and friend connections, personality traits, occupations, and education. By reading their words, you can learn how they express themselves and even get an impression of the feelings or emotions they were experiencing at the time. Court cases can truly give you a glimpse of your ancestors' lives that is unlike any other record you may uncover outside of a personal family collection.
Welcome to Expree, an organization all about care and craft. And as Kentuckians, we know a thing or two about both. It's the recipe for good bourbon and good banking. Expree is determined to make a difference, simply by being different, much like these Kentucky legends. We've been around for a while, and we know how to handcraft solutions for you, your personal financial cheerleader. We're Expree Credit Union, and this is Spirited Banking.
Every family has at least one mystery.
And as a member of the Kentucky Historical Society, you can unlock the past through our incredible collection of genealogy resources, available both online and here in our library. Our team can help you discover unknown family histories for a fraction of the cost of a DNA test kit. Call or visit to learn more. Become a member, and let's find your Kentucky ancestors.
So we left Granville Crawford walking 11 miles to Hartford, Kentucky to give testimony in his niece Slander's trial. So as you can see, he was one of a number of witnesses called by both sides, a list that includes several of his own children. Unfortunately, we don't have the actual trial testimony, but in looking at the witness list, it's obvious that Mary Cannon was relying on her family to support her. It's also interesting that both sides seem to have called Samuel C. Crawford as a witness. Now, this might be a good time for a side trip into another topic we're interested in, and the service of Granville's son or sons in the Union Army during the Civil War. You'll remember 2 Samuel C's were listed as living in the Crawford home during the 1870 census. The elder Samuel had enlisted in the Union Army for a 3-year term on November 2nd, 1861, joining the 17th Kentucky Volunteer Infantry. Unfortunately, Samuel had some problems while serving in the military. He was continually absent from duty, apparently from a combination of recurring illnesses and perhaps being taken prisoner by rebel forces. He was eventually charged with desertion and was court-martialed. He was found guilty and sentenced to make his time good and forfeit all pay and allowances from December the 16th, 1862 to December the 16th, 1863. The Army transferred him to Company C of the 21st Regiment, Kentucky, to serve out his time. His military career wasn't a happy one, but we can confirm that at least one of Granville Crawford's sons served in the Union Army during the Civil War. But remember, there was a second Samuel C. Crawford listed in that 1870 census report, a 14-year-old. The older Samuel had died by the time Granville walked to Hartford to testify in the Cannon versus Bugg case, so he can't have been the Samuel C. Crawford called as a witness in that case. But we think we know who that man was. Our research uncovered another one of Granville Crawford's sons, Leonard, who had a 3-year-old son named Samuel, listed in the 1860 census. Leonard lived next door to his father in 1860, so it's very possible that 10 years later during the 1870 census, his son Samuel was visiting his grandparents. In any case, that Samuel would have been about 20 when witnesses were called to testify in Cannon versus Bugg. But we don't know why he was called by both sides. That's still a mystery. We do know how the case turned out. And Tamara, do you want to dare to make a guess?
I'm afraid.
You're afraid. Well, I was too till I found out. Well, it's time to find out. Despite Granville's best efforts, the final ruling went against his niece, Mary Cannon. Court records indicate that on November 21st, 1877, a trial by consent ordered that Mary Bugg was to receive from Mary E. and J.B. Cannon the sum of $5,000, with $4,500 remitted to her, and of course the remainder to cover court and lawyers' fees. But more sad news for the Crawford and Cannon families was to come the next year, when Granville himself died on the 19th of December, 1878. But wait, this Ohio County saga has yet another chapter. As the ruling in favor of his daughter Mary was about to be made, Dr. J.F. Bugg encountered some legal problems of his own. In October 1877, the Commonwealth of Kentucky brought a case against him to the local grand jury on a charge of unlawfully practicing medicine. A few months later, in April 1878, he was indicted on that charge in the Ohio County Criminal Court. At the time, Dr. Bugg put up a $100 bond to guarantee his appearance, but a few days later, he absconded back to Indiana, landing in Granville, just across the Ohio River. So as you can see, the local paper couldn't resist having some fun with the doctor's name. Humbug, bye-bye Bugg. Given the court case brought against him, it would be easy to assume that the doctor was a charlatan, more interested in legal maneuvering than in healing patients. But a little historical context is in order before we can render our verdict. The practice of medicine in Kentucky was changing during those years, and Dr. Bugg was not the only one affected. In 1874, the Kentucky legislature passed an act authorizing the governor to appoint a state board of medical examiners. The goal was to establish criteria for being able to practice medicine in Kentucky. And to find out more about that, we went to Professor Jamie Day at Transylvania University's Monroe Musnick Medical and Science Museum. Watch this.
Well, Transy was founded in 1780, and by 1799 we had a medical school which operated for 60 years. So our last graduate finished in 1859. And then the Civil War came along and all of these artifacts were put away in storage. Some of them were kept in our medical school building, which burned during the war. And we actually had students and faculty rush into the flames and rescue a lot of these artifacts. So they have a great history. After the war, they were put away in storage again and not discovered till roughly the 1920s. And by that time they were antique and they were recognized for their historic value as well as their scientific value. Correct formal education you could get from Transy would be 2 years of study. And they did have summer breaks, but and they were fairly short semesters. But they would study for a total of 2 years with our faculty, and they would study anatomy, surgery, materia medica, which is basically pharmacy, obstetrics, sort of the basic things that we study today, but with different titles. But it was possible, if you had been practicing kind of as an understudy, that you could get some credit for work that you had done in the past. But we know that other people claimed that they had a Transy degree, and people probably just didn't check. If you were a doctor in the wilderness or some rough area in Kentucky and said you went to Transylvania and you were dressed right, people probably believed you. We were the third medical school in the country, and at times we were as well equipped as any school in the country. It was always a problem that there were people in the country, even in the city, who were practicing medicine who didn't really know what they were doing. And also pharmacy was a very unregulated thing at the time, so people could make up their own medicines with all kinds of horrible compounds in them and sell them from the back of a wagon, make a lot of money and then skip town, for example, or practice as a physician in a small rural community and really have no training. And as long as you were just treating colds and delivering babies, if you had experience with that, it would be okay. But if a serious disease came along or an epidemic, then there could be big trouble. If you practiced medicine for at least 10 years, you could be grandfathered in. I guess the assumption being if you had lasted a decade as a doctor, you probably knew enough about what you were doing to continue. If you got caught and if your community complained, then you would be tried. You could be sentenced up to 30 days in prison. You could be fined $100, which was a decent chunk of money back then. Even for quack physicians, that was a lot of money. If you were decent at what you did, most communities didn't complain. So this act was set up to protect the community from the whole state of Kentucky from charlatans and quacks. And to ensure that it was successful, the governor appointed a commission of 5 physicians who would interview doctors, quiz them on things like anatomy, physiology, and so forth. And they ultimately had the decision of whether this person should practice or not.
Well, learning about the state of medicine in the last quarter of the 19th century gives me even more sympathy for what sick people like Samuel Crawford must have gone through, doesn't you?
Yes.
But what about Dr. Bugg, the guarantor of his $100 bond, faced with the loss of a substantial amount of money, retrieved the doctor from across the Ohio River and delivered him to the Ohio County Jail. An unsympathetic Kentucky jailer was happy to see the trial date set. It's very possible that an Ohio County judge and jury, still mindful of the huge damages won by Mary Bugg from the Cannon family, would have convicted the doctor given the chance. But in the end, there would be no more courtroom dramatics and no more jail time for Dr. Bugg. Instead, the doctor was able to prove that under Kentucky law, he had been practicing long enough to not require a formal license, and so he was set free. And it probably shouldn't surprise us to find that Dr. J.F. Bugg decided to leave Sulphur Springs behind once and for all. As for the community itself, the newspaper clipping expresses their feelings. And so ends the tale of Granville Crawford, his sons, and a genuine Kentucky feud, albeit one that played out in a courtroom. Pretty interesting. Tamara, what do you think?
Wow. I mean,
would you have ever guessed all of the twists and turns of this story?
And to sue over, well, I'm a lawyer, I know people sue over the dumbest things, but probably shouldn't have said that. But calico,
and for $5,000.
That's a lot of money.
It was a lot of money even by today's standards. Well, this has been such a pleasure to take this journey with you, and I hope we've answered your questions. You'll be given a full report that might offer some other possibilities as you explore your Kentucky roots, and our research team can also answer some other questions that you might have. We want you to know that we were just delighted, Tamara, to have you sitting right here this time instead of out there as you did last time. Thank you so much. Give her a round of applause. And we also want to thank all of you for being here for Kentucky's Ancestors Town Hall. I'm Renee Shaw for the Kentucky Historical Society. Take good care.